Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. Wendigo stories. When I was young, I often spent parts of summers with my grandmother in her home out in the country. It was my favorite place in the world, and I always looked forward to the week-long stays of gardening, baking, late-night fires with s'mores and ghost stories, and enjoying having my grandmother all to myself. There was a pond not far from her house where I would sometimes go to swim. It was home to quite a few frogs, and at night they made the most incessant noises. I complained to my grandmother only once, saying I couldn't enjoy the night breeze with all that racket. She took me on her lap and told me a story about an old man and woman who lived near a lake. The old man couldn't stand the singing of the frogs, but his wife told him that they kept the Wendigo away, and to harm them would be unwise. Well, he didn't listen, and set about methodically catching all the frogs on the lake. It was a process that took some time, but he did not stop until he had rid the lake of the pesky amphibians. That night, without the protection of the frogs, he and his wife were slaughtered by the Wendigo, a vicious, whip-like demon creature with elongated fingers ending in razor-sharp talons and rows of silver teeth as thin and keen as needles. I wrote it off as another of her ghost stories, though she seemed more serious than usual about it. I never complained about the frogs again, mostly because I grew to enjoy them and put the story out of my mind. In fact, I'd forgotten all about it until it came up this past spring in a Native American literature class I was taking in college. The mention of the Wendigo sparked that old memory of my grandmother's story. I thought she had made up the word. I didn't realize there were stories about it, originating in Algonquian legends. Eager to connect something from my childhood to the topic, I Googled it, only to find that my grandmother had apparently been mistaken. There was nothing I could find about the story she had told me, nor any references of frogs providing protection from the Wendigo. In fact, the Wendigo of legend seemed very little like my grandmother's version. They were said to be insatiable, craving human flesh, and sometimes created from the forms of people who had resorted to cannibalism to survive. Descriptions varied, but they sounded almost nothing like my grandmother's bogeyman version. I actually chucked as I read it, almost a bit embarrassed by how badly my grandmother had messed up the original tale. I changed residences this summer, moving to a newly built, 1,000 square foot, on each side, duplex on the edge of town. The other side is to be occupied by my landlady, who'd had the place built. However, she isn't scheduled to move the rest of her stuff in and begin living there for a couple of weeks. She's waiting for her lease to end. Even though my new place is only a few minutes from the edge of town, it feels much more isolated. I enjoy the seclusion of my new home and its proximity to a more natural setting. I'm surrounded by woods, and from my patio, I can even see a pond beyond the carefully landscaped lawn, which is meticulously carved out from the surrounding woodlands. Just like the pond near my grandmother's house, the frogs have put up a ferocious racket lately. I prefer not to pay to run my air conditioning if I can help it, so I have every window open to catch a breeze. That means that I can hear them as clearly as if I were standing on the water's edge. It took a few days to get used to the noise, but I'm fine now, just like I was those summers when I was young. In fact, the noise has been comforting to me during the stress of the move. Tonight is different. I find myself standing in my living room, staring at where the pond is, though I can't see it in the dark. The air is eerily still and oppressively warm, but all my windows are shut, and I feel impossibly cold. I'd long since convinced myself that my grandmother's story had been a silly tale, a twisting of an old legend by irreverent storytellers. But for some reason, I have the most overwhelming sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. I don't know what to do. I'm trapped. Leaving my house means braving the darkness beyond my home, but I don't know if I'm going to be safe in here, either. The frogs have stopped singing. Second story. I found a village in the forest that does not exist. I have been a park ranger for many years, and I love the forest because it is diverse. In Elysian Grove, the trees stretch their branches across the sky, and the ground is covered with an intricate weave of grasses, shrubs, flowers, and mosses. Every time I walk into the forest and catch sight of a new vista, I feel as if I am discovering something brand new. A hawk glides past me and I watch his every move. Then, I realize that he is hunting, searching for prey to bring home to his family. If a fire spreads through the forest and destroys everything in its path, a vast portion of our natural history will be lost forever. Several weeks ago, however, something peculiar occurred to me that I just have to share with you. I was on my usual patrolling in the forest. The towering trees and a canopy of leaves were so thick they blocked out all the light. The ground was covered in a soft blanket of moss, lichen, and ivy, with interweaving roots and fallen logs forming intriguing pathways. The air was thick with the fragrant scent of pine needles and wildflowers, and the sound of birdsong fills the air. A deep silence pervaded the forest, broken only by the rustling of leaves, the gentle ripple of stream water, and the croaks and calls of various wildlife creatures. Every now and again, I could hear distant thunder rumbling in the distance, or a twig snapping underfoot. Everywhere I looked, there was beauty and serenity. As I ventured further into the woodlands by my quad, I noticed smoke curling up in the sky. My mind leaped with worry that a forest fire had broken out. With caution, I inched closer to the aroma of smoke and hid in the dense foliage. To my surprise, I spotted an entire village that was concealed from view until now. I couldn't believe there were people living in this remote area of the forest. A small, peculiar village was tucked away in the depths of the forest. The buildings were made of logs and stones as if they had been grown from the ground itself. The village was surrounded by tall trees, obscuring it from view. The people there moved slowly and cautiously, as though they were wary of being seen. A thin plume of smoke rose up into the air, indicating that a fire had been lit in the center of the village. A feeling of mystery filled the air around the village and made me want to explore further. As I made my way through the bushes, the village seemed to have been untouched by the modern world. To my surprise, I was greeted by a group of friendly villagers who welcomed me with open arms. "Hello there. I'm Emma, a park ranger. It's nice to meet you all," I said. The villagers smiled and welcomed me to their humble abode. "We are honored to have you here, Emma. Please come with us. We'll make you some tea," said one of the villagers. I followed them into a cozy house, where I noticed a peculiar tradition. The villagers always walked backward when entering or exiting a building. I couldn't help but notice that you all walk backward when entering or exiting a building. "Is there a reason for this?" I asked, curious. The villagers exchanged a look and then one of them spoke up. "Yes, it is a tradition that has been passed down for generations. We believe that walking backward brings us good luck and keeps evil spirits away." I nodded in understanding and took a seat at the table, where they served me a cup of tea made from herbs found in the forest. As I sipped on the warm beverage, I struck up a conversation with the villagers. "I must say, I'm quite amazed by this place. How long have you all been living here?" I asked. "Many generations. We've always lived here and never contacted anybody else," replied one of the villagers. I was taken aback by this statement. It was hard to believe that such a remote village had managed to survive without any contact with the outside world, not to mention that I had been working as a park ranger, but I had never come across their village, and I should have known about it. That's quite impressive. How do you manage to sustain yourselves?" I asked. "We have our own land and we cultivate it for our needs. We also gather food from the forest and the nearby river," replied another villager. As we continued to chat and drink tea, I felt a sense of peace and tranquility in the village. It was a stark contrast from the hustle and bustle of the city. As we conversed, I pulled out my pocket-sized vanity mirror to check my lip color. Before I could lift it up to my face, I saw the uneasiness in the room, followed by a few stares when they realized what it was. Even in the dim light of the room, I could tell the residents wanted me to keep it away. It was very odd, and I couldn't help but ask, "Excuse me, is there something wrong with my mirror?" The residents looked at each other nervously, and then one of them spoke up. "We don't like mirrors in this house. They give us bad luck and attract negative energy." I was taken aback by their response, but I tried to hide my surprise and asked, "Really? I've never heard of that before. Could you tell me more about it?" The residents hesitated for a moment, but then they opened up and shared their beliefs with me. In our culture, mirrors are believed to be a portal to another world, and they can attract spirits and ghosts. We avoid them as much as possible. I nodded slowly, trying to be respectful of their beliefs, but I couldn't help but wonder why they were so afraid of mirrors. I decided to change the subject and ask them about their hobbies and interests. As we talked, I couldn't help but glance at my mirror every now and then, but the residents kept their distance from it. It was as if they were afraid to touch it or even look at it. I nodded in agreement and left, still feeling puzzled by their beliefs about mirrors. It was a strange experience, but it was also interesting to learn about a different culture's beliefs and customs. After a few minutes, I accepted their offer to explore the tiny village. As I stepped out of the house, I immediately noticed something strange. None of the people in the community had shadows. Even stranger was that their footsteps made no sound against the pavement. I froze in place and watched them in amazement as they moved silently through the streets. One of the inhabitants noticed my confusion and approached me. "Is everything okay?" he asked. I hesitated for a moment, trying to find the right words. I couldn't help but notice that you and your community members don't seem to have any shadows, I finally said, hoping for a logical explanation. The inhabitant shrugged. "It's just the way we are. We've always been this way, for as long as we can remember." I was getting frustrated with his vague answers. "But how is that even possible?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The inhabitant looked at me calmly. "We don't know. It's just a part of our community's history and culture." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like something out of a horror movie. I have to go," I stuttered, feeling uneasy. As I walked away, I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that lingered within me. I had never experienced anything like this before. The more I thought about it, the more scared I became. It was as if I had stumbled upon a community of ghosts. I decided to do some research on this community when I got home. But at that moment, I noticed that one of the inhabitants was watching me intently. He approached me and introduced himself as Jackson. "I heard you were interested in learning more about our culture," he said with a friendly smile. "If you'd like, I could take you deeper into the village and show you around." I hesitated for a moment before agreeing. Jackson seemed nice enough, and I was curious to learn. He led me through the narrow streets, pointing out various landmarks and explaining their significance. We eventually stopped in front of a large building, and he explained that it was a temple dedicated to the gods of their community. It was a stunning sight. The temple was made of white stone and had intricate carvings all over its facade. The windows were stained glass, depicting scenes from ancient mythology. We stepped inside the temple, and I couldn't help but feel awed by its beauty. Everywhere I looked, there were statues and sculptures that seemed to come alive with each movement of light. The walls were decorated with colorful tapestries and paintings that depicted stories from long ago. As Jackson and I were leaving the temple, I suddenly heard the sound of bells ringing in the distance. I turned to Jackson, puzzled. "What's that sound?" I asked. Jackson smiled at me. "That's the sound of the bells signaling the start of the silent hour," he explained. "For the next hour, nobody in the village is allowed to speak or make any noise. It's believed to help us attune to the forest's energy." I was taken aback by his explanation. "Wait, what? Nobody speaks for an hour?" I asked, incredulous. Jackson nodded. "Yes, it's a tradition that we've had for many years. It helps us connect with nature and find inner peace." I couldn't help but feel skeptical about the idea. But how do you communicate with each other during that time? What if there's an emergency? Jackson chuckled. We have our own ways of communicating without speaking. We use hand gestures and facial expressions, and if there's an emergency, we break the silence. As we walked through the village, I noticed that everyone was observing the silent hour. It was eerily quiet, with no sound except for the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirping of birds. I tried to keep quiet, but it was difficult for me. I was used to talking and making noise, and the silence was making me feel restless. I couldn't help but feel like I was being punished for something. But as the hour went on, I began to appreciate the stillness and quietness of the village. It was like a peaceful oasis in the midst of a chaotic world. And when the hour was over and the villagers started to talk again, I felt a sense of relief and gratitude. Although it was strange and unfamiliar to me, I accepted the tradition and learned to appreciate the beauty of silence. It was a humbling experience that taught me to slow down and appreciate the present moment. After the end of the silent hour, the village returned to its usual liveliness. People were talking and laughing, children were playing, and the sounds of music filled the air. I spent some more time exploring the village, admiring its beauty, and talking to the locals. But as I spent more time with them, I began to notice something strange. The people in the village were somehow different from anyone I had ever met before. They spoke in a strange language that I couldn't understand, and their customs and beliefs were completely foreign to me. It was as if I had stepped into a different world, one that didn't seem real. The more I explored, the more I felt like I was in a dream. The village seemed too perfect, too beautiful, too serene. It was like a utopia, and it was almost too good to be true. The locals seemed too calm, too peaceful, almost like they were under some kind of spell. It was as if they had no worries, no problems, no conflicts. I tried to ignore my unease and enjoy the beauty of the village, but the more I looked around, the more I felt like I was in a surreal world. It was like a movie set, where everything was perfect and pristine, but it lacked the messiness and complexity of real life. As the day drew to a close, I realized that I needed to leave the village. It was too strange, too unreal, and I couldn't wait to go back home. As it was getting darker, I noticed that the eyes of the inhabitants seemed to glow subtly in the darkness. It was a strange sight, and it sent shivers down my spine. I turned to Jackson, who was standing next to me, and asked, "Why are your eyes glowing like that?" Jackson looked at me, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Our eyes have always been like this," he explained. "It's a part of our biology. We can see in the dark, which is why we don't need any lights in the village." I couldn't help but feel creeped out by his response. "You don't need any lights because your eyes glow?" I asked, trying to make sense of it all. Jackson nodded. "Yes, that's right. And we don't sleep either. We believe that sleep is a waste of time and that we can achieve more by staying awake all the time." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like I had stumbled upon a village of nocturnal creatures. "You never sleep?" I asked, feeling more scared than ever. Jackson smiled. "No, we don't. We spend our nights meditating and connecting with nature. I wanted to leave the village as soon as possible. I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that lingered within me. It was as if I had stumbled upon a community of creatures that were not human. "I have to go," I said, my voice shaking. "Thank you for showing me around." Jackson nodded in understanding. "Of course. It was nice to have you here. Come back anytime." I turned and walked away, feeling like I had escaped from a nightmare. The experience had been both fascinating and terrifying, and I couldn't wait to leave the village behind. I started running towards my quad, desperate to get away from the strange village. I felt like I was being watched, and I could feel the eyes of the villagers on my back as I ran. The darkness seemed to stretch before me, and the stars shone brightly in the night sky. The forest was dark and eerie, with twisted trees that seemed to reach out for me. The only sound was the rumble of the quad's engine and the rustling of leaves in the wind. The night was quiet and still, with no signs of life around me. As I drove deeper into the forest, the darkness seemed to close in on me, making it difficult to see what lay ahead. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and my palms were sweating on the handles of the quad. It was as if the forest was alive and was watching me. The only thing that kept me going was the thought of getting out of the forest and back to civilization. I had never felt so alone and vulnerable, and I was desperate to get out of there as soon as possible. As I continued driving, the forest seemed to become even more surreal. The trees were twisted and gnarled, and the shadows seemed to move and shift in the darkness. It was like a nightmare come to life, and I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever make it out of there alive. But then, I saw a glimmer of light at the ranger station, and my heart leaped with hope. It was a sign of civilization, and I knew that I was getting closer to safety. With renewed energy, I drove towards the light, determined to make it back home. The forest may have been eerie and terrifying, but I was stronger than my fear, and I knew that I could make it out of there. As I arrived at the ranger station, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I could see my colleague, John, sitting at the front desk, typing away on his computer. When he looked up and saw me, his expression changed from one of surprise to concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, noticing the pale and terrified look on my face. I shook my head, feeling too scared to speak at first. Then I took a deep breath and told him about my experience in the strange village. John listened intently, nodding occasionally as I recounted my encounter with the villagers. As I finished my story, John's grandfather walked into the office. He was an old man, with a kind face and a gentle smile. He greeted me warmly and then listened to me as I repeated my story. When I was finished, the old man looked thoughtful. "I know the area you're talking about," he said slowly. "There used to be a village of Indians living there. They had a beautiful community with their own customs and beliefs." I felt a sense of unease creeping over me as he spoke. "What happened to them?" I asked, my voice shaking. The old man sighed. "They were hit by a natural disaster a long time ago. Their village was destroyed, and no survivors were ever found." I felt a chill run down my spine. The thought of encountering spirits and ghosts was too much for me to handle, but I have never had the courage to go back and find it out either. Third story. The feral forest. I have seen the ice sheets in the Antarctic and the sand dunes in the Sahara. I saw the curve of the world as I floated in zero gravity, and I felt the crushing weight of the sea 400 feet beneath the waves as I explored unknown wrecks. 3 ex-wives, 8 recognized children, and none of them deserve the fortune I have accumulated. And yet eagerly they wait, because they've heard the rumors. I hear the whispers in the halls beneath my office. Murmurs of cancer, the bad kind, the type of cancer that you don't survive. It's true, non-small cell lung cancer is the biggest killer in the USA, and I just found out that I've got it. When I was 20 years old, my father got me working for him in our family grocery shop, Walker & Sons. He was ecstatic. The shop was started by my grandfather and bared the family name, and my father was ready to hand me the lead. In a single day, I saw a demand that we could barely supply, and as I flipped the door's sign to closed, I asked my father why he'd never bothered to expand. "This shop isn't about the money," he'd stated, hunched over a dustpan and brush. Pop built this store with his own hands so that he could support and raise a family. Money can buy you a lot of things, but it won't buy you happiness, it won't buy you love, and it can't buy you good heart. He stood up and arched his back, clearly in pain. 7 years later, when the 25th Walker & Sons supermarket opened, I was on my yacht with a group of entrepreneurs and philanthropists that had become my friends. I had proved my father wrong for the first time. When I was in my mid-30s, supermarkets were just a small drop in an ocean of investments, startups, and ventures. I was one of the super rich, the top 1% of the top 1%. By that time, I could promise you that there was at least one item, in any room, almost anywhere in the USA, that my companies had some part of manufacturing, designing, or constructing. That's when I met Hannah and found a love with a price that would prove my father wrong a second time. I nearly lost myself back then. Hannah spent her time looking after my first two children while I got high on whatever I could get my hands on. Meanwhile, the money kept us together. She was happy as long as she had a credit card without a limit. Thousands were spent on designer shoes and clothes. Tens of thousands were spent on nannies. Eventually, even the money couldn't replace what she really needed, a loving husband. She cost me millions of dollars in settlements, and I can guarantee you she isn't seeing another cent from me. I won't bother going into my other ex-wives or children. Let's just say that it was a mistake to marry and a mistake to breed. I never could keep my eye away from a pretty young thing. It was in the haze of my 30s that, unbeknownst to me, I would give myself this incredible opportunity. I didn't really care at the time. To me, I remember seeing it as a chance to play God, and that's something I was never going to turn down. At this point in my life, it was rare for me to have a day of sobriety, and when I did get past the hangover, I wasn't of much use to anyone. The letter had been sat on my desk for a couple of weeks before I got around to opening it. It had managed to stay at the top of the pile because the man that had delivered it to me had been stubborn enough to insist it was to be hand-delivered by him. He waited outside for nearly 5 hours. When he was finally sent up to see me, he simply handed me the letter and left. The contents described a project unlike anything I'd ever heard of. It asked for a hefty amount of money just to begin, and then an annual sum to cover the costs of staffing and research and development. I couldn't give it to them fast enough. I secured myself a line with the head of operations, Mark Young, and told him I was always on the other line. Mark purchased a vast amount of lush forest land in an area I won't disclose under his own name with an account funded by me. He erected a wall around the perimeter and hired 24-hour surveillance. Not a single spot in or around the forest was unseen at any time. With that, and a tree canopy thick enough to avoid any potential satellites snooping on us, we were safe. A building large enough to be a small town was constructed. It had a food mall, a hairdresser, a small hospital, staff living quarters, and everything the workers would need in their new home, for however long their contract was for. Mark's plan could never have come to fruition without me, so I owned him. Between ourselves, we called it the forest. In public, we didn't talk about it at all. No one did. The staff were looked after as long as they didn't ask any questions. We tried our best to keep the sections separate, and, in general, everyone was happy to keep their knowledge to themselves. Our first step was to buy the orphans. We purchased 25 healthy baby boys and girls from different orphanages of different ethnicities and countries. We raised them without language, without education, without love. Once they could walk, they were taken from the nursery and placed into the nest. The nest was designed to introduce the subjects to the world. It was a simple 3-walled room with a ceiling to keep them dry, and a small outside area enclosed by a simple chain-link fence to keep away any animals. There was nothing in the nest except for grass and mud. We didn't clothe the subjects or give them beds. Mark wanted to know what a real human was like. Each morning and night, a siren would wail. From a hatch in one of the walls, we would drop cooked meats. As the children grew older, they began to fight for the food. Scratching, pushing, and pulling at hair. Nothing was against the rules when food was involved. Once they were 5, male subject 6 wandered up to the fence and put his face against the wire. His body was already marked with scars and bruised from that day's fighting. Without much hesitation, he clambered up the wire frame and dropped down the other side. From that moment, the subjects were free to roam the forest. As puberty set in, the forest became a difficult place for the girls, and consequently, the boys. Under the circumstances, it was difficult to say if consensuality was something we could ever consider. These were humans, but they did not have a language beyond grunts and shouts. They did not have law that permitted or denied certain acts. Everything was natural. This was the first time we saw something that divided the pack. Suddenly, the boys were no longer happy in each other's company. With sex came ownership, and with ownership came an unwillingness to share. The biggest of the boys were also the first to hit puberty. Male subjects 1 and 12 each took control of a large proportion of the girls. Left over was the majority of the boys and a couple of immature girls, who unfortunately suffered for the next few months until they were allowed into one of the tribes. Food became a battle between the men. 3 male subjects were killed in as many months. Another simply died from starvation. However, when male subject 7 reached the brink of hunger, he warily approached the tribe of male subject 1. On his knees, the nearly man crawled up towards the clan resting beneath a large tree. Subject 1 was alert, watching with wide eyes as he approached. As the boy got even closer, Subject 1 stood and marched over. The girls were getting restless. The boy stopped moving and shielded his face with his hands, peering through the cracks in his fingers. In a moment where the choice was violence or sympathy, this was the first time a subject had shown sympathy. Subject 1 nuzzled the boy away with his foot, pushing him from the group. 7 was too weak to even crawl away and fell to his side. He died the following day. It was during this time, when the feral children were nearly 15, that I decided to enter the forest. Mark had argued with me furiously right up until I'd told him I'd pull the plug on the funding to his project if he didn't let me in. He let me join the group with a scowl and insisted I was as accurate in mimicking their condition as possible. In his words, they should have no reason to believe I hadn't been living there for my entire life. And so, Mark Young watched as his 40-something billionaire investor took to the forest stark naked and eager to begin. I sauntered up to 12's tribe with my hands swinging by my sides. The boy shot up to me, screaming and hollering in my face, trying to push me away from the girls. I'd seen him do this to the other boys, and usually it worked. I tackled him to the ground and punched until he was spitting blood and barely moving. Dominance was key. The tribe became mine, and I took 7 girls from the boy I left wheezing on the grass. He stumbled away from us, back toward the other boys that had been confined to their own company in more recent times. My girls were beautiful. They were young, fit, athletic, and the sex was incredible. It was so primal and instinctive. I've honestly never had such insatiable urges, not even the drugs compared to it. Quite frankly, I'd never been happier. Over the course of a few weeks, I gave them names that suited their faces. I learned each of their quirks. I stood my ground against any of the boys that tried to take my throne. I got in fights to win my tribe our food, and I never spoke a word. I was only planning on spending a couple of days in the forest, but I stayed for 4 months. Once I finally left the forest, I never really managed to fit back into the real world. My mind kept drifting back to my girls. My third wife was nothing compared to them. My kids were screw-ups. My businesses all but ran themselves, and the world outside of the confines of that forest was lackluster and meaningless. When Mark gave me the call nearly 5 months later, I felt a happiness I hadn't felt since I was in the forest. 3 of my girls were showing signs of pregnancy. 3. I gave my wife whatever she needed in order to have her sign for a divorce and flew to the forest. I watched them on the cameras. They were beautiful, flawless, even. 12 had reclaimed the group, and I felt rage building inside me as I saw him laying with my girls. I nearly threw up when I saw him sleeping with them, 2 heads nestled into his neck. It should have been me. It should always have been me. I stormed back into the forest with fire in my eyes. The boy was alerted to my presence by the frightened noises the girls made as they scampered behind the trees for cover. I would never hurt them. 12 was a bit bigger than when we last met, but not by much. Not by enough. I think I broke one of his arms because he ran off into the forest whimpering with it held to his chest. I took no time asserting my dominance with the girls. It was good to be back. The world was perfect again. 2 of the children survived. Once the first was born, Mark and I agreed that more food was needed to be dropped to feed the increasing population. The other tribe also had 2 babies, and it was important for us all that our girls were getting enough to live. Male subject 1 and I had come to an amicable, unspoken agreement that we would each take half of the food that was dropped. The other boys scavenged what we left behind. Every 6 months I had a checkup with the doctor in the building attached to the nest, and after a few years I stopped talking altogether. My companies continued to profit. My children did not care for me, or I for them, and I truly needed nothing more in the world. Today I had my biannual checkup with the doctor. I've been living in the forest continuously for 17 years. The sounds of the city drive me crazy. All of the engines and horns and shouting and bright lights all through the day combine with the foul air and make my head spin. The screen on this computer is hurting my eyes, and it takes me forever to find the right key. Mark is still watching me every day. He says he might join me next year, when he retires. The doctor flew in a specialist who confirmed the cancer in my lung, and was told not to ask any questions. What's funny is that, even now, I have the chance to prove my father wrong for a third and final time. My father said money can't buy a good heart, but it can buy a good lung from a willing donor. The truth is, my sons have begun to best me in the forest. I do not have much time left with my girls before a new king heads the pride. If I do get a transplant, I must either go back to the real world or live out my days shunned from my own tribe, which I cannot bear to do. I'm sorry, Mark, but it looks like you'll be going in alone. I have seen the ice sheets in the Antarctic and the sand dunes in the Sahara. I saw the curve of the world as I floated in zero gravity, and I felt the crushing weight of the sea 400 feet beneath the waves as I explored unknown wrecks. 3 ex-wives, 8 recognized children, and none of them deserve the fortune I have accumulated. But 13 girls, 15 children, and 9 grandchildren, along with an entire forest of people, true people, deserve every cent I have ever earned and ever will earn. When I die, all of my savings and subsequent earnings will go directly to the forest to provide space to expand and grow. Thanks for the ride. 4th story. I climbed the stairs in the forest and still regret it. 13 years ago, I went mute, and I am finally able to talk about what happened. From a young age, I was an extroverted and a stubborn girl. Although I always listened to my parents, but that time, at 12 years, I felt rebellious. My neighborhood held a Girl Scout camp. Every year, my parents didn't allow me to go, but this time I felt old enough, which was my first mistake. Me and Kelly, my best friend, begged our parents, but they refused because they are responsible adults who cared about us. But to us, 12-year-olds, they seemed like monsters. So, I made a plan. We told our parents that we are going to Katie's house for a sleepover. They talked to Katie's parents, and we did stay at Katie's for approximately 12 minutes, and then we left for our epic camping trip. Kelly decided on the place, Lundenburg Woods, and that was our second mistake. Kelly and I have been best friends ever since we were little. Recently it was her birthday, and I gifted her a unicorn bracelet which she never took off. Our neighborhood is surrounded by woods. The Girl Scout camp took place in the eastern part of Westvia Forest, so we were quite far away. We didn't really have any camping gear, just 2 pillows, a blanket, a small Barbie tent, a flashlight, and some snacks enough for a day. We rode our cycles from Katie's to the woods. At first, everything seemed nice. We heard birds chirping and cars go by. The weather was nice and warm. We saw squirrels and rabbits jumping around. But as we went on, the forest grew thicker. We were tired of running around, so we sat under a dark-shaded tree. We ate our snacks, and I tried to scare Kelly, but what will happen next terrifies me to the core. As we started walking down the wrecked trail again, we couldn't hear or see any animals. The only sounds we could hear were of the rustling of the leaves. There was an eerie presence in the woods. I felt uncomfortable and suffocated. And then there was a sudden cloudburst. It felt like the whole woods were closing in on us. An ominous feeling wrapped around me. The trees looked like tall, intimidating creatures. The peal of thunder startled us, and both of us ran for shelter. In a state of panic, I realized that Kelly was missing. Fog surrounded me, so I couldn't see anything, but I could feel she wasn't here. After I calmed down, I investigated my surroundings and scouted for Kelly. As I said before, where I lived was quite warm, but here it felt like it dropped about 10 degrees. Anyway, while walking down the path, I noticed something. It was iron? As far as I know, that wasn't natural. Why would there be human-made stuff so deep in the forest? I walked closer to it, and in betwixt of the fog, I saw an iron staircase. It seemed new, polished, and untouched by nature, almost as though time had stopped for it. It seemed like someone had cut the stairs from a house and put them here. I was so mesmerized by them that it didn't even register to me that all the sounds were blocked off. At this point, I could hear nothing but my own breath. Looking at the stairs, I felt an unexplained morbid feeling to climb up them. At that time, I felt like it was a must to climb. I had no choice. So I did. I started climbing them. With each step, I felt disconnected from reality. Nothing mattered. Eventually, I couldn't even hear my own breath, or was I not breathing? You may think that creepy sounds and screams are scary, but no. Silence, dead silence, is the most terrifying thing that could destroy a person. This type of silence will make your skin crawl and make you want to rip your ears out. There was only the final step left between me and whatever lies beyond. The last thing that I could recollect was feeling a push. That's it. I fell and lost consciousness. When I woke up, it was still pouring, even heavier than before. After I made sense of what was happening, I felt like being watched. Then I heard my name, Rebecca, in a low, distorted voice. It didn't sound human. I got up and looked around and saw the thing that haunts my dreams. Every last thread of hope was shredded by this deep despair. What I saw was a thing so horrifying that I can't even begin to describe it. It was tall and had 2 dark holes for eyes, a huge distorted grin which stretched from one side to the other. It had huge limbs with sharp claws covered with disgusting blood. I was petrified looking at it. It continued to say my name in a now childlike voice. It began to walk towards me, repeating my name in the same disturbing voice. In a state of panic, I searched for a weapon and my eyes landed on a piece of wood. Without thinking, I swung the piece of wood, hitting it until it was a bloody mess. After I realized what I had done, I ran away. I kept running and running. In my attempt at escaping that demon, I barely noticed the sounds of the woods. Panting and gasping for air, I finally made it out and dashed to my home away from the deathly forest. I broke in and started crying hysterically. Kelly's parents, the Adams, were also there talking with my parents. All of them shared the look of despair on their faces. There were cookies on the coffee table which were untouched. My once sugar-loving parents were now anxiously making phone calls. My angsty teenage brother was actually out of his room and nervously listening to the conversation. Kelly's mom, Mrs. Adams, who once was a fashion diva and always wore makeup, was rough and sobbing, and even Mr. Adams, the most cheerful person I knew, was on the verge of tears. When their eyes met mine, they were completely taken aback. Mom threw everything, including the expensive new cell phone, and ran towards me. They hugged me so tightly that it was hard to breathe. All my anxiety faded away when my mom brushed the dirt off my face. For a second, everything was roses and butterflies until I saw the look on Mr. and Mrs. Adams' faces. I could feel hope blossoming in their hearts. Their hope was like a beautiful stained glass window which was shattered by the despairing news of the absence of their daughter. When they questioned me about Kelly, my silence gave them the answer. I could see the color drain out of their faces. The forest rangers searched the entire forest until they came across a battered mess which DNA confirmed to be Kelly. It seemed she was beaten repeatedly with a blunt object. She seemed like an unrecognized pile of flesh. Kelly, who once was a high-spirited girl, obsessed with unicorns and nature, was now a part of the soil. We identified her because of the bracelet I gifted her, which was also covered with blood. Nearby, they found a piece of wood covered with the blood of Kelly, which was likely the murder weapon. There was no trace of fingerprints, footprints, or any other evidence due to the torrential rain, giving an upper hand to the culprit. Now, even after 13 years, they couldn't identify the perpetrator of this crime. I've told this traumatic tale to many, but there's one detail I always fail to mention. After hitting the monster, my eyes laid upon the lifeless body of my best friend, Kelly Adams. Fifth story. We survived a Wendigo attack. I'm happy to see others also had these experiences. It's a bit like group therapy in a very twisted way, I guess. This isn't an AA meeting or anything. Years ago, when I was fresh out of high school, me and my friends went for a camping trip. Since it'd be the last time we saw each other before college sent us on our separate ways. We had planned to go deep into the national forest in the mountains and just enjoy ourselves for a few weeks. My friends who came along were Preston, a Native American who had several years of survivalist strategies under his belt. Jamie, a hunting and gun enthusiast like me, with a propensity for adventure. Mark, Preston's friend, not so much mine. He smoked a lot of drugs and seemed to be okay, but I was always on edge around him. With us we packed 2 tents, dried fruit, rice, jerky, camping supplies, and beer, along with a Mini 14 rifle A Saiga, 12 shotgun 2 pistols, my Taurus Judge revolver, and Jamie's .357 revolver. We packed all of this into my battered BMW station wagon, with me being the driver. Stopping at a car park, we loaded up our gear on our backs and began going deep into the forest. The first day was uneventful. Preston found a good clearing for us to settle at. We set down our gear and set up the tents while Preston got to work with the cook fire. I was always good at setting up tents, so this wasn't a problem for me. Within 20 minutes, we had set up the basics of camp. I cracked open a beer and sat next to Preston, who had created a roaring fire. I smiled at him. "I'm gonna miss you, man." I patted his back. "Me too. Let's enjoy this," he responded. Jamie and Mark were carrying on, exploring the surrounding area. At the time, I could have sworn I saw a pair of green eyes and antlers looking at me. I would come to regret not asking Preston in the coming days. I tried to forget as we sat down to dinner that night. Campfire curry, a mix of curry spices, frozen chicken we brought and prepared, and a few vegetables, along with a small pot of rice. As it was the first night, we ate all of our perishables. It was tasty for sure. Then, like we were kids once again, we roasted marshmallows and made s'mores. It was truly a very fun time for sure. If only it would have lasted. That night was uneventful as well. I slept like a baby, and Preston, whom I shared a tent with, didn't seem to be bothered at all. The next morning, we packed up camp and decided to head south towards a large river with the intent of spending a few nights riverside. As we were in the remote wilderness, I handed Preston my Mini 14, and I myself carried the Saiga 12. Slugs and buckshot alternated in its 10-round magazine. Jamie kept his .357, and I had my sidearm as well. We walked for what seemed like hours. The mistiness, overcast weather, and lack of clear landmarks required we rely on GPS and compasses. As we headed south, I saw the look on Preston's face. He looked worried. "Preston, what's up, man?" I asked him. He had me get close, and he whispered, "I dunno, man. I got a feeling that a bad omen is about to pass. Keep everyone in sight. I'll listen for anything." As he said that, we heard what sounded like a distant whooping noise. All of us looked around. In the distance behind us, I could have sworn I saw something shambling. It was too far to shoot with my shotgun, so I pointed at it and told Preston to shoot. "Shoot that thing." 3 shots from the Mini 14, and the smell of freshly fired ammunition filled my nostrils. Whatever it was got down on all fours and bounded away. "What was that?" Mark asked, shocked. Preston swore up and down in his native language before he finally said that, "My friends, is something truly evil. We need to hurry to the river." We ran for about 30 minutes, our pace slowed by the amount of heavy gear we carried. Preston looked from side to side, but found nothing as he did so. Soon, we reached the rushing river, and with that the fog seemed to dissipate. Preston looked around, shook his head, looked at his GPS, and finally said, "The other side of the national forest is available to us across a hand tram a mile upstream. We can make it there before lunchtime if we hurry." "Preston, what's going on? What was that thing?" Jamie asked, concerned. "I can't be sure, but it's nothing good. I want to try and lose it across the tramway. Whatever that thing is, if it's anything like my family stories, it won't ford a river. We're going. That's final." Preston led the way upriver, keeping close to the shoreline. Eventually, we did find it. A large steel and wood car suspended over a wide expanse of river. I got in first and wasted no time getting across. I watched the trail on the other side while Jamie went across next with some of the extra gear, and then finally Preston and Mark squeezed into the tram and got across. As I turned to leave, I saw Preston take out his Bowie and he began hacking at the rope suspending the tram. "What are you doing, man? That's state property. That's a felony," I said, bewildered. "We can't have that thing follow us." He hacked at the rope until it snapped, and the tram car fell with a loud clang into the river below. As we left and started heading east, I could have sworn I saw those green eyes again, but just for a moment, watching us. We made camp at a clearing on the edge of a hill's wide ridge. It gave us great views and visibility, but more importantly, as Preston stated, we can see anyone or anything coming. As he sat and made the fire, he said, "We're doing watch rotations. That thing, I am genuinely afraid of it. I bet it's just a bear, Preston. Too many family stories." Mark guffawed. As I said previously, he was Preston's, not my, friend. I took the second watch after Preston cooked a meal of rice pudding. I had no trouble staying up. Then Jamie. I sat up and talked with him for a while. He worried a little, and he expressed that he wanted to go home. "I know what you mean, dude. This is too creepy." Mark took the last watch, my shotgun propped up next to the tent in case he needed it. Or so Jamie told me. When we got up the next morning, Mark had disappeared. Immediately, we questioned Jamie, whose story checked out. He saw Mark up and watching. We waited, Preston reigniting the few vapors. He also pulled out a small can of pine tar and began making torches. "What are they for, Preston?" Jamie asked. "I'm sure of it. We've got a Wendigo." Preston replied. "A Wendigo? The fuck is that?" I replied. "A cannibalistic demon with green eyes, a deer skull for a head, and a thirst for human blood. They're also like skinwalkers, you know, like in True Blood. At the time, the TV show was popular." He explained. "I became very scared, so that grabbed Mark and ate him. We'll wait for Mark for a few hours. Keep the guns locked and loaded. Do not let him approach within 200 feet of the campsite. I'm going out for a bit." "You're crazy, Preston," I protested. He whispered in my ear, "When I come back, ask me my favorite sailor. It's Saturn, for the record." He then approached Jamie and told him something that I knew I wasn't supposed to hear. Then he grabbed 2 torches, his knife, and he turned back to us. "Wendigo do not like fire. Keep the fire going. There's plenty of sticks and wood right there for a few hours. I'll be back. Do not forget what I told each of you. If I can't answer it when I come back, shoot me." As he disappeared into the forest, I sat with Jamie, back to back. He had my Saiga, I had my Mini 14. For hours, we heard various sounds in the forest, including those whooping noises, the sound of what sounded like Mark, and what I thought was the sound of a distantly beating drum. By afternoon, we heard rustling in the forest, and none other than Preston returned, dirt smeared on his face, and a makeshift drum under his arm, with 1 torch left. He stopped short of the campsite when I raised my gun at him. "What's this about, guys?" "It's me, Preston," he said. "What is your favorite Final Fantasy protagonist?" Jamie asked. "Squall, of course." Jamie lowered his gun. "What is your favorite sailor?" I asked slowly and deliberately. "Saturn, of course." "I suppose this means Mark is still missing." "Yes," he responded. I lowered my gun and said, "Come on up, dude." And yeah, We heard whooping noises but no sign. Preston averted his gaze. It's hunting us. I confirmed the tracks, and my little serenade in tribal chants caused it to at one point come and look at me. How did you get away? I asked. I chased it with fire. They're afraid of it, remember? He responded. Do guns harm them? I asked slowly. It can injure them, but you really need fire or silver. We only have fire, as usual. We're going to burn one of the tents and drop some gear. We're going light. We're heading to the highway. It's 35 miles to the east, but we can get there over 2 days. But we'll need to double our night rotations. And if you see anything that looks like Mark, he's dead, guys. I'm sure of it. Preston responded. I was very afraid at this point. The sinking feeling that my idea could have gotten everyone killed. I took charge. We will do 15 miles today and 20 tomorrow. We will hitch a ride back to the car. We'll burn our trash as we move. We'll burn the tent tomorrow morning. Let's go, now. We hastily packed what we could carry and burned much of our non-essentials. We hurried throughout the afternoon and early evening, running when we could and walking as quickly as we could. The whooping call continued to seem to follow us at a distance. I didn't, however, see antlers or green eyes when I looked back. Eventually, we found a clearing that was decently sized, had good visibility and sticks. We hastily gathered firewood, all staying as a group, and we pitched camp. That dinner was cold jerky and dried fruit. Preston was unwilling to attract attention from smells, but he did create several pine tar torches and set them at the outskirts. We didn't say a word, but me and Preston took the first watch. Then Jamie and Preston, then me and Jamie. This continued every 2 hours until the daytime. As day broke, we heard screaming. Mark's voice came from the woods crying for help. Preston shook his head. It got him. We can't do anything about it. We burned the tent and continued traveling throughout the day. I could see it today, though. It didn't bother to hide itself by noon. The Wendigo was about 7 feet tall. Its limbs were blackened, 2 glowing green eyes set into a deer skull with antlers. Soft whooping noises. It kept its distance. I pulled my revolver and aimed at it, about 250 feet away. Firing, I hit it in the chest. It barely flinched. The thing turned and stared at me. Preston began to shout at it aggressively in his native language. It stopped, tilted its head, and then responded to him. I asked him, "What the hell did he say to you?" I asked him what he did with Mark. He responded, "Who's that?" Preston then grabbed my Mini 14 and fired repeatedly at him. This abomination seemed to get annoyed. I followed up with a well-placed slug to the chest from my Saiga. It howled in pain and dashed away into the woods. We better run, I think. I remarked to the group. We ran for a good 20 minutes when suddenly, in a clearing ahead of us, was a human silhouette. Naked, filthy. Guys, it's me. You gotta take me back. I escaped that thing and have been running from it for the last day. It was Mark. I pointed my Saiga at Mark. What happened to your clothes, Mark? Yeah, and if you're Mark, tell us the name of the school we went to. Preston said. He pointed the rifle at his head. Come on, guys, don't play around. It's me. I'm cold, I'm hungry, and I want to go home, he protested. Jamie shoot him in the leg with his revolver. Mark screamed in pain. Unless you want the next to be your head, answer the fucking questions. Jamie shouted. That's when Mark's head snapped to Jamie in a grossly unnatural fashion. I was paralyzed by fear as it appeared as if Mark was contorting and screaming in unnatural tones. I fired, repeatedly. All remaining shells in the magazine. It just seemed to shred the upper skin. Putting that on my back, I remembered, Wendigos hate fire. I grabbed my lighter and a can of bug spray, and I dashed at the thing that was once Mark, spraying it with the fire from my makeshift flamethrower. As I burned it, Preston laid down 2 entire magazines into it and then dumped the rest of his pine tar on it, and Jamie emptied his revolver. When it finally stopped screaming and moving, we were left with a mutilated and charred corpse, half Mark, half Wendigo. We all threw up. Preston began to butcher its corpse and said, "I've got to destroy the corpse. It's only right that I do this." For an hour, Preston burned and cut up the corpse, then cut the heart out. He put it in a plastic bag and then shoved it into his jacket. It took us another few hours to reach the highway. Preston sat and began to cry on the sidewalk as Jamie kept a hitchhiker thumb out. I sat next to him and asked, "What are you going to do with the heart?" "I have to take it to the reservation. There, my elders have to know these things are still out there. And we need to protect those from these monsters. He clenched his fist. "I'll wipe them out by myself if I have to." For Mark. By evening, a sympathetic farmer stopped and let us ride his bed into town. From there I paid for a cheap motel room, where we breathed a few sighs of relief. The next day, we returned to my car. Thankfully, it started, and we left the area around the forest easily. I didn't talk to Preston for several weeks after that. He eventually showed up at my house during the summer and asked my father if he could stay the night. At the time, I still was living at home. My dad obliged. Preston told me that the elders were shocked and told him that they'd amass a party and take care of it. They came back with the skull of 2 Wendigos and 6 hearts. They also found scraps of Mark's t-shirt, surrounded by a pile of decaying gore. To this day, Preston, Jamie, and me have had a pact to never tell anyone about the horror we witnessed. I only break this pact now, years later, and because we can safely say that this is behind us for the present. My advice: if you hear whooping noises and see green eyes and antlers, run or fight it with fire. Guns can cause it pain, but only fire or silver can kill it. I pray that the abominations are wiped out one day, but I know in my heart that won't happen. Be safe, everyone. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.